Hi everyone, thanks for being here tonight. I'm Meghan from Public Library, and we are privileged tonight to have Catherine from Pathlights here with us for our third event in the series, and this program is entitled Caring for the Caregiver. So thanks to all of you who have been with us for the first two parts. Next week we're going to start a new series called, or based on Medicare. So if you have any questions or need any information about that, please consider coming to that as well. Tonight we're going to hold all of our questions to the end of the program. So if you do have questions, I've got, if you're interested and you need a pen and paper to write them down, I've got some of that. If you are watching this over YouTube, you can please feel free to put your questions in the chat and we will get to them at the end. That's it. So I'm going to hand it over to Catherine.
Hello again, everybody. Thanks for joining us again for the third part of the series. This is a topic that I really like to end the series on, because now we're going to talk about caregiving and what do we do for ourselves through our caregiving journey. So I really hope that it imparts some wisdom for you to take home from here and kind of just be sure to continue taking care of yourselves as you're caring for your care partners. So of course, just as a point, my name is Catherine Stowers. I am a licensed clinical social worker in the state of Illinois. Excuse me. I oversee several programs at Pathlights, caregiver program being one of those. Pathlights, of course, was PLOW's Council on Aging. We talked about this a few weeks ago. We were PLOW's Council on Aging for 45 years, and we recently rebranded to Pathlights. So same mission, same services, same service area, just a new look and a new name. So we're glad to have you here today. Thanks for joining us. So who do, I guess just if anybody wants to say, who do we think caregivers are? So who could a caregiver be? Family member? Neighbor?
Friend, close friend.
Friend? Paid service. So it's limitless, right? So neighbors, friends, family members, longtime friends, right? Anybody can really identify as a caregiver. It's really somebody that kind of jumps in to help manage tasks for someone. And what are tasks? That could be anything, right? That could be taking your care partner to their doctor's appointments. That could be grocery shopping, preparing a meal, taking their garbage cans in and out, right? So it's many tasks that kind of encompass the caregiving world. And it doesn't have to just be older adults, although Pathlights, of course, we provide service to older adults in our township. But it doesn't have to just be older adults, right? It could be a friend of yours that's chronically ill that you're kind of stepping in to help for. Parents of young children, right? So for the sake of our conversation today, we are kind of focused on caregivers who are caring for older adults, but that doesn't mean that many others aren't caring for others. Some caregivers live close, some caregivers live far. And some of those tasks that we talk about are easier to do from a long distance, right? Helping manage bills, scheduling doctor's appointments. So it doesn't mean that you have to see somebody either to be a caregiver, right? But it's important to recognize that caregivers have many roles. And we don't want to ever discount the value of ourselves as a caregiver by saying things, this is just what family does, this is what friends are for. Statements like this can really mask the value of the care provided and the significant toll that caregiving can take on individuals. And we'll talk about that a little later. So for most older adults, the care they receive from caregivers enhances their health, their well-being, brings them comfort, companionship, health, safety, and that's why it's really important to take care of ourselves so that we are able to impart our care to others. Sorry, everybody. There we go. Sorry, everybody. So actually, before we get into this, does anybody want to share what's hard or difficult about caregiving? Does anybody have any thoughts about what might be hard or difficult? And you can let me know if anybody says anything in the chat.
Communication.
Or communication.
It can be physically
emotionally exhausting.
Physically and emotionally exhausting, yep. Anybody else? So those are really great. How about financial, right? So there can be a huge financial burden to caregiving. And sometimes that doesn't just mean the amount of money that we are paying out to provide, to maybe have somebody come in and help care. But sometimes caregivers have to remove themselves from the workforce, right? Because they have to take care of their loved one. And that can have significant financial toll too.
It's a communication, and who does what, and to what extent is everybody getting along about making these decisions.
Yeah. So everybody getting along and
That's part of
relationships and dynamics and all of that, yeah. Finding time to give, if you are a caregiver that's helping, maybe raising children of your own, working full time. To Megan's point, emotions. So how about guilt or shame, right? Fear, hopelessness, right? All of these feelings can really encompass, not saying that it's for everybody, but these feelings can come up, of course, in caregiving. Sometimes people feel that they lose their relationship with their loved one. So their identity in that relationship may change, right? So I'm no longer able to really identify as my mom's daughter. I'm identifying more as a caregiver, right? So sometimes that, and that can bring up a lot of emotions too. Lots of thoughts about, am I doing the right thing? Have I made the right decisions, right? So there's lots of emotions that come up. So through all of that, when we talked about what's difficult, that's why self-care is so important. So why is self-care so important? So self-care, of course, means taking care of ourselves. Has anybody heard the airplane analogy? I might have said it the first week. Yeah, so what do they say to you on an airplane? If a plane is going down or if the oxygen masks come down, you put your own mask on first before helping someone else. And that's this idea behind this presentation and this idea of taking care of yourself, because you are your best caregiver for someone else if you make sure that you're also taking care of yourself. So these are just some tips about why self-care is important. Women spend a lot of time caring for children if they have them, and then also spend even more time caring for elderly parents. Spousal caregivers are 6 times more likely to suffer symptoms of depression and anxiety. Children caregivers are twice as likely. Stress of caring for a person with dementia has been shown to affect the immune system for up to 3 years, even after caregiving ends. This is the cost. Now, that's an inordinate amount of money, right? When we look at the amount of care that informal or unpaid caregivers are providing, that would cost about $306 billion annually, right? So there's a financial toll to this all too. And family caregivers are consistently at greater risk for health problems, sleeplessness, high blood pressure, headaches. So when we talk about protecting our health, it's critically important to maintain your physical and emotional health and well-being, because if you don't, who's going to do that for you? That's why it's really important we take care of ourselves. And as I said, your good health is the best gift that you're able to give to your loved one. Reaching out for help is something we're going to talk about a little later. So reaching out and asking for help is never a sign of weakness. Rather, it demonstrates strength and a keen awareness of our own abilities and sense of self. So we'll talk about why asking for help is a part of taking care of ourselves. All right, so I'm not going to go through these. They're all on here. I won't read them to you, but this is about identifying stress. So just a couple of points, and then there's a second slide on it. There's 15 points altogether. So things like, do you feel isolated? Are you exhibiting uncharacteristic emotions or reactions? Am I lashing out when that's normally not what I do? Am I raising my voice and that's really out of character for me? Are you turning to medications, alcohol? How's your sleep? Is your appetite changing? Thoughts of suicide for yourself? Are you finding it difficult to, do you find it increasingly difficult not to blame the care receiver, right? Even though they have limitations. So how many do we think, if you say yes to how many of these 15, do you think it's time to think about stress relief?
Maybe 2 or 3.
Yeah, 2 or 3. This actually says 5. But I actually would agree that if you're experiencing any of this stuff, it's maybe a good time to really start to think about care. Because what this all can lead to, the more of these we say yes to, the more likely we are to burn out, right? Which we'll talk about a little later. So when we talk about caring for older adults, caring for aging older adults doesn't necessarily show improvement the way that caring for a child does, right? So you're caring for a young child, and you think they're going to grow up and become more independent, which means I'm going to kind of take a step back a little bit, and they're going to be able to do more on their own. When we're caring for older adults, that's not necessarily always the case. Sometimes as someone ages, they become more dependent on caregivers for help. For all sorts of things, the garbage, the preparing meals, the laundry, all of that. So this is really important, especially when we're talking about caring for older adults. So let's talk about identifying stress, right? Or managing stress. So some general strategies when we talk about managing our stress, focus on what you can do, right? So there are some things that maybe you can't do or you're not comfortable doing, and that's okay, right? It's about having an honest conversation with ourselves about knowing our own boundaries and what it is that we're willing to do. What's reasonable? So ask the physician of your care partner, I'm just really frustrated because Bob cannot put his shoes on. And this is driving me crazy every day because he can't put his shoes on. Well, maybe Bob can't put his shoes on, right? And so as we talk about the decline for all sorts of health issues, maybe it's time for a conversation with the doctor to say, listen, I'm expecting that Bob is going to be able to get himself dressed every day. And maybe that's just not Bob's reality. So that's why sometimes having a conversation with the doctor is really important too, because we have to really be reasonable and think about what we're expecting our care partners to do, because that may not be something that they're able to do for themselves. So some other things, focus on what you still have, despite what you have lost, reframe recurring stressful thoughts, and abandon the idea of fair distribution of work. So often, in a perfect world, if you had 4 children, all 4 children were going to take their 25% of the caregiving role, and it would be a lovely get together of everybody would agree. But we know that that's not always the case. And so sometimes we have to just abandon this idea that everybody's going to play an equal part. Because what happens is, if everybody doesn't do that and you're expecting them to, it's just going to cause you more distress. Right? So sometimes we have to just let go and say, you know what? My brother has never been good at managing the finances. He's probably never going to be. So I have to abandon the idea that that's something he's going to be able to help with, right? But it takes some time to get there. It's hard. Emotions can come with that, right? Angry, resentful, all of these things will come to play with it also. So we'll talk a little bit about acute and chronic stress. So does anybody want to tell me, is stress good or bad? Anyone? In the chat? No?
Very bad.
Very bad? 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 Bad. Is stress ever good? So I guess this is a trick question, right? So sometimes stress can be good, right? So sometimes stress can be helpful, right? So very acute stress, sometimes it can motivate you. So in college, I sometimes wrote my best papers with very little time to do so because I was under an unimaginable amount of stress, right? It can help you achieve a goal, become more confident, right? So sometimes stress is good, sometimes. But, so although we tend to think that stress is bad, there are also some events in our lives that are stressors, but are also good things, right? Getting married, whew, that can be stressful, right? Having a baby, beautiful thing, can be stressful. Going on vacation, anybody planned a vacation, especially during COVID, can be stressful, right? So it's not all bad. But where we really start to worry for caregivers is when that stress becomes long-term and it's chronic, right? because that's where we start to experience burnout. And that's where we start to feel some of those not very great feelings of resentment and, anger towards our care partner. So under most circumstances for like short-term stress, the threat passes, right? So I'm really stressed about this paper. I write the best paper of my life at 2 a.m., hand it in, and that stress is now gone, right? So the stress response kind of becomes inactivated, and my stress levels are back to normal. So that's acute stress, right? So it helps you adapt to survive the stressor. But there are some stressors that we face that are long-term, right? So what are some long-term stressors? Anybody want to share?
Maybe your own chronic illness.
Your own chronic illness? Yeah, that's a good one. Really, it's kind of the stress that kind of doesn't feel like it goes away, right? So caregiving sometimes can have peaks and valleys where things don't feel so bad, but then we go through times where maybe they feel pretty bad. And so if we're feeling more bad or dealing with chronic stress, that long-term stress, that's when it can start to impact us, right? So how does stress impact us? How does stress impact you, I guess? What was that?
Gets you mad.
Gets you mad, yeah. So there's like an emotional response to that, right? You can get you mad.
There's hormones that are making it worse.
Yeah, hormones can get worse. Yeah.
Insomnia.
Insomnia, yeah.
Blood pressure.
Blood pressure. So I didn't skip to the next slide. You guys are, what was that? Forgetfulness. Those are all, so right, stress is going to impact us in so many different ways. Where does anybody feel their stress in their shoulders or like their upper back? That's where I feel mine. So sometimes it's physical, right? You can physically, like you can feel the weight of the world on your shoulders. Fatigue, medical complaints, high blood pressure, interpersonal, so relationships. So now I'm feeling withdrawn from my care partner. I'm feeling isolated from others. That can come with loneliness. That can bring depression. Mental, the inability to focus, bored. Sometimes if you're overwhelmed or you're forgetful because you're kind of just lost in thought all the time. Spiritual can come up for some people too. So they start to question the meaning of life or purpose. Or if spiritual is something that you're feeling conflicted with, God, why did you choose this for me? And that is very real stress that many people experience. And emotional, to your point, sadness, depression, anger. And using, not all stress can be treated the same way, right? So like if my shoulders are hurting, going for a walk to clear my head may not make that better, right? So if we're able to identify where it is that we're feeling the stress in these categories, am I feeling isolated from my friends? Well, going to the gym might not help that because I'm still isolated from my friends, and that's really where I'm feeling this hole, right? So I think using the same coping mechanisms are not going to work depending on where your stress is falling. Yes.
Someone messaged that caring for a loved one long term causes shut down.
Oh, yeah. So somebody in the chat said caring for a loved one long term can cause emotional shutdown. Yeah, no, that's very real. Yeah, thank you for sharing. I'm at a good angle too, I can see you. So thank you. Exercising may not, soothe interpersonal stress like calling an old friend, right? So if we're feeling stressed, it's really important to identify where is it that we're feeling it, because then we're going to maybe be able to figure out the tool that's going to help us. Okay. So caregiver stressors, right? So identifying stressors in your life can be the first step to decrease your stress. So a series of changes, large or small, which I'm going to talk in the couple of minutes about your self-care strategy and what that's gonna look like, you know, a series of changes, large or small, take place in the life of the person who becomes a caregiver, right? So sometimes those changes can be anticipated, right? Sometimes they can't. Sometimes if you are caring for somebody who's maybe diagnosed with dementia very early onset, this gives you an opportunity to plan for the future. Versus maybe if you were never a caregiver and your care partner had a stroke, that is instantaneous putting you into a caregiver position, right? So everybody's situation is going to be very different, and some changes happen very quickly, and some are very gradual over time. But many of these changes, right, so these changes we experience are going to become those stressors for us, which is what makes our life as a caregiver pretty stressful. So what are some caregiver stressors? So we lose loss of leisure activities or relationships. I oftentimes when I'm working with caregivers, I will say, you know, have your role as a caregiver impacted your ability to be social with your friends? 9.9 times out of 10, people will say, are you really asking me this question? You know this answer. Because we know that caregiving can be so isolating, and that we oftentimes don't feel like we have time to do everything we're doing for our care partner. So how am I going to have time to see my friends, right? So our social life can definitely be impacted. It can change role family dynamics, to your point earlier. Isolation, to your point, general loneliness. COVID has not helped that situation. That has made it even, you know, harder for people. Financial demands, as I mentioned earlier, this might not just be having to pay for care, but you know, sometimes, so women are more likely to be caregivers than men in this. I'm not saying that that's the right way to do it, but women tend to be more often the caregivers, especially for parents. So if a daughter kind of removes herself from the workforce to help care for her parents, that's going to have long-standing implications for her. You know, she's removed herself from an income, which can possibly impact her own retirement, right? So there could be very long-standing financial demand or financial concerns that come up with what, like even removing ourselves from the workforce. The physical work of caregiving, right? So often caregivers are, you know, causing great physical damage to themselves by lifting, carrying, and maybe not just walking with the person, but carrying the equipment, you know, the wheelchair in and out of the car, the walkers up and down the stairs. So there can be a great physical demand on the caregiver too. And to your point, communication changes, right? So sometimes there's just the communication will definitely change throughout the caregiving journey. So cost, of course, the caregiving. Sorry. So physical costs. Does anybody want to think of a cost in any of these categories that caregiving, you know, that caregiving can cost you? We've touched on some of them already, right? So we've touched on, you know, physical, let's say potential costs, you know, loss of sleep or eating habits, joint pain. How often as a caregiver have we skipped our own doctor's appointments because we just don't have time to do that, which can have, you know, long-standing effects. Sometimes people ineffectively cope and turn to drugs and alcohol, right? So there can be very physical costs of caregiving. Social, we've talked about this many times, the isolation, loss of energy, you know, loss of money to travel, losing connection with our friends, you know, psychologically, emotional, we've touched on a lot of this already. Depression, anxiety, forgetfulness, and economic force. Okay, so what is burnout? So burnout is a term that we, of course, hear pretty often, and anyone can suffer burnout. You know, we can suffer burnout at work. We can suffer burnout in some sports we play. But caregivers oftentimes can suffer burnout too. So it's a term that we hear often. And it's really where we feel seriously stressed and now have also lost the inability to cope, or the ability to cope, right? So this is gonna, earlier on, we talked about caregiver stressors and how to manage them. And, hopefully if you're feeling stressed, you're gonna tap into what it is that's gonna make you feel better, calling friends, going to the gym, seeing your doctor. But burnout happens where we feel so stressed and also are unable to turn to those coping mechanisms. So it's a state of emotional and physical exhaustion, and it's caused by that chronic stress, right? So that stress that just doesn't go away. And when somebody feels overwhelmed and is unable to cope. Has anybody felt burnt out before? Yeah, I've that shakes too. It's a very real feeling. So now that we know what burnout is, what can we do about it? So recognize, admitting that there's a problem or that you're even able to talk about it is a huge step, right? So recognizing that there is a problem. Let go. Are you able to let go of the things that are bringing you stress? That's sometimes much easier said than done, right? Sometimes when we're talking about caregiving, so often the conversation is focused on what has been lost for our care partner, so they've lost physical abilities. With dementia, maybe they've lost cognitive abilities. You've lost a lot through this journey. And so is there a way to kind of reframe and look at our loved one's strength and kind of focus on the positive and kind of what remains, right? Take care of your own health. Take care of your own health. Take care of your own health. It's actually, I would, to be honest, and so often we are working with caregivers that are in an inordinate amount of stress, and the caregiver has passed away before the care partner because of the stress that they're under, because they don't go to their own doctors, don't take their medicine. And it's a reality out there that happens, which is why it's really important to take care of ourselves. Build a caregiving team. Are there other people that can come in to help? And that, again, in a perfect world, if you had 3 siblings, the 4 of you would share that. But maybe it's not family. Maybe it is a neighbor. Maybe it's a friend. Organizations like Pathlights have programs that might be able to benefit you, right? So looking at both those informal, team members, but also the very formal ones and what's available. Support group, that's not for everybody. These are support group isn't for everybody, and if you're really feeling like you're at a point of no return, it may be time for you to have that conversation with your doctor. One of the things, listen to your friends, sometimes it's really hard to hear, like, well, Meghan, I'm seeing a change in you. But, I mean a change in me. But sometimes, like, our friends and our loved ones will notice kind of a change in our behavior before we are willing to see it ourselves, if that makes sense. And so kind of take a minute, if somebody says that to you, take a minute and think about whether or not what they're saying could be true. Oh, you know what? She might be onto something. I haven't gone out with my girlfriends every week like we used to do. Where I stopped going to bowling, right? So some of these kind of changes happen and they happen so fast and we don't think about it. So if somebody says it to you, it might be a minute to take a pause and to say, is that the reality? Am I doing those things? We sometimes have to acknowledge that we have our limitations too, right? So we maybe can't do everything, right? Incontinence, for one thing, be a game changer for caregivers. So I will care for my care partner in the house. I will cook them 3 meals a day. I will move them into my home. I will pay for anything that they need. But the minute somebody becomes incontinent, it can be a game changer, right? So we have to know, that's just not something I think I can do. And so now, what am I going to do about it? And it's okay, because if we recognize our limitations, it's going to allow us to cope and to be able to maybe bring some help in to help with the things that we could be causing us to burn out. And support groups, I know I said it, but not for everybody, but they can provide an opportunity, a place to kind of share, work through feeling. Pathlights hosts a monthly support group. We're meeting via Zoom right now. But there's a great deal of support, a great deal of resources. I have learned so much, programs and equipment and all of these very great things. So a support group may be a great way to just talk to others who are experiencing it, right? Because sometimes that happens too, like our friend, we get together with our friends, and I think that's really great, but they don't know what we're going through. And so sometimes you're like, you just don't get it, and you don't want that to be a cause, more of a stressor for you to like have your friends telling you to just get over it either. So sometimes a support group, having that shared space with caregivers who are going through similar situations can be really important. Okay. So I want to talk about kind of developing a self-care strategy. This is what I call it, but feel free to call it whatever it is that you would like. So this is basically just a commitment to ourselves that we are going to take a moment and take care of ourselves. So now that we've identified what we are stressed about and maybe evaluated how stressed are we, now it's time to develop what it is that we're going to do about it, right? So this is not meant to be a to-do list, right? So it's a verbal, sometimes written, like a caregivers write it down, commitment that you're going to make to yourself to take care of yourself. So what does this mean? So it could be anything. It could be anything. So does anybody want to share or online what is something that brings you joy or something that you just love to do for yourself? I sometimes will ask caregivers, is there stuff that you really enjoyed doing before you became a caregiver that you just don't feel like you have time for anymore?
Mountain bike riding.
What was that?
Mountain bike riding.
Mountain bike riding. That's a good one. So mountain bike riding. So that's something you would want to do, right? So if I said to you, so you're a mountain bike rider, and if I said, okay, we're going to develop a self-care strategy for you, and it's going to involve gardening. You think that'll work for you? No. Right? So we want to be really honest with things that bring us joy and things that are going to make us feel good. And yours is a double whammy because you like to do it and it's giving you good physical, output too, which is really good. So what we want, so it has to be something we want to do when we're making this commitment to ourselves. It has to be something that we want to do. It's got to be realistic and reachable. So I'm going to put you on the spot. If you were going to commit to yourself to mountain bike riding, how many days a week realistically do you think you could commit to doing that?
4 or after,
Now, if you were going to get back to it now.
a week.
Okay, or no, great point. Doesn't have to be a week. A month?
A month, I'd say maybe twice.
Twice a month. Great. So that feels realistic and reachable to you. If you were to say today, I'm going to leave here and I'm going to say, mountain bike riding brings me a lot of joy. And in October, it'll be pretty weather for mountain bike riding. If you left here and said, I will try to mountain bike ride 2 times in the month of October. Does that feel reachable for you?
Yes and no, I mean, it does, but unfortunately, it's not something you just do right away. It takes time to get there, and get back. And there's no one to watch my father there.
So it feels maybe reachable. So if you kind of are starting to think about your self-care plan and you think, oh, now that I've said that out loud to Catherine, yeah, that doesn't feel attainable. So maybe I'll try once this month, right? Because the goal here to developing our self-care strategy and what that's going to be is not to bring you more stress. The goal here is for you to not leave here and go mountain bike ride by Halloween, be like, oh, I'm so mad at myself, right? That's not the goal of this. The goal is to really be honest with something that brings us joy, something we feel we can realistically do, and we want to be specific, right? And this is where, for your instance, like you said, somebody isn't available to, stay with your care partner. That's where coming into your care, your care team might be helpful. So is there somebody that can sit with your care partner so that you can go out to do this? Because this, now we're saying, is really
Well, it
important.
does have someone come in 3 times a week in the evening. But especially now with the time change, if I were to wait for her to come and leave, we could talk by the time I get there.
Yeah, and so there's care in the home, but it might not be the right time. So there might be those informal supports. Is there someone else that can stay with, your care partner? If not, reaching out to agencies like Pathlights, because there are programs like respite, that are available to individuals who need a bit of a break, right? So the respite program is really meant to give caregivers a break so that they can get out, because we know taking care of yourself in whatever way is important to you, mountain bike riding, your own doctor's appointments, going to lunch with a friend, that's where some of those more formal programs might come into place if there isn't informal help, if that makes sense. We don't want to set goals that are going to just cause us stress and disappointment. Like, I'm not a runner. I'm sure that doesn't shock any of you. I'm not a runner. So if I left here today and said, okay, yeah, I'm going to run 5 days a week starting tomorrow, I mean, that's just going to cause me stress, because by Tuesday I probably haven't run once. And now I'm really disappointed and mad at myself, right? So we don't want anything that we decide that we're going to do to cause us stress. Start simple, and maybe, if it's something, if that doesn't feel feasible to get out of the house, maybe it's just something we can do at home for ourselves too, right? So kind of thinking about that. We want to be specific. So taking better care of myself. If I said, oh, my self-care strategy is that I'm going to take better care of myself, that's not specific enough, right? So I'm not, we have to have a defined plan, easy to carry out, and that means we'll be more successful. So, what is my example? So an example. So I will sit down in my favorite chair on the porch and skim the May issue of Time magazine on Saturday afternoon while Grandpa is out getting his haircut. That's really specific, right? So I've identified a time where I think that this is something I'll be able to do. I've identified a place for it. How often am I going to do it, right? Or down at the bottom, more physical. So I will jog on the treadmill for 20 minutes. Oh, I'm very specific with the time here. During the reruns of King of Queens on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday of this week, right? So very specific. So does anybody want to give one a try? And share what is something you think you could do for yourself as a self-care strategy? I know we said the mountain biking.
I was just looking at the first one. Who's taking the rabbits?
Right. So I may be really lucky to have somebody in my care team that is able to take Grandpa, and that's not everybody's reality.
Yeah, I can take the rabbits. So.
You'd be taking Grandpa. So that might not be a time that you'd be able to do something, right?
And the whole time he's there, you're either getting texts or getting something where you can't actually enjoy it. Right? Wondering, going, okay.
That's a great point, and I think especially during COVID, we've become far more accessible, right? So when I'm doing something and I'm feeling very stressed, I have to sometimes make a very mindful decision to turn my phone off. Now, I'm not saying that you should do that if you are caring for someone and they need to have, you as an emergency, but that might be, or at least turning the ringer off and looking at your phone after 5 minutes. So it might be enough. It just depends on the situation. It's also very different for everybody. So some other tips when we talk about our self-care strategies. So grab a partner in crime. So I'm like the best walker when my neighbor goes walking with me. She keeps me accountable, right? So is there somebody that will help keep you accountable, somebody you enjoy spending time with, right? So that might be something that will help you succeed too. I've had people write it down before, put it on the fridge or the place that they're going to see it to remind themselves that they are making that commitment to themselves to take better care. reward yourself, right? Take it one day at a time. If you say, back to my king and queens, if it's Thursday and I still haven't run on the treadmill twice like I was supposed to, it's fine. Have grace for yourself because things happen, especially in the world of caregivers. And we sometimes we try again tomorrow. So seek outside help. So to your point, who's going to sit with dad so that I can go do this? Is there some informal supports or more formal supports, like agencies like Pathlights, the VA, other state programs that are available? Maybe if there's not a lot of informal supports, outside friends, groups, and remind yourself frequently of the importance of taking care of your own health. Sorry. Does that feel as though that feels like something to be able to do? Develop kind of a self-care strategy for yourself?
I can share something that how I did exactly that a while back. I think about for your presentation.
Sure, go for it. I will
Back
read
when
it.
I was going through cancer treatments and was a slave to the medical system long term, whether, just trying to having bad days or the appointments, just lots of stuff. And I have young kids, and it's real easy to have all those appointments, and there's so many problems going on that was, just consuming everything. So I deliberately went out of my way to schedule on my planner something, anything that was family time. And I scaled it way down from what we ever did before. It's gonna just a walk around the block, or we're just gonna go to the nature center. And I just told myself, if it doesn't work out, that's fine. But I would pencil it in so that it wouldn't be forgotten, or next thing you know, a week or a month goes by, to find that balance. And most of the time, because of knowing it's coming up and having a family plan for something close to home and simple, most of the time, I was able to get that balance just by having that there. Even if it was boring or small, but it's still family time. Even if it's short.
So going through your own health stuff, you were purposeful, you wrote it down, you identified something you wanted to do, which was family time. You wrote it down in your calendar to say, these days we're going to do something, and you were realistic.
So everybody can connect too, just free, we're just going to be free of all that, and just take this little walk.
Yeah, and you were realistic, because maybe the little walk was all that you could get in, and maybe some days you walk a little further, and that's great too, right? So yeah, so you
good for them too. The family time instead of the other tension,
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So yeah, all those points, right? So you were realistic with the goal, you knew what it was that you wanted to do, you set a time to do it, you wrote it down, you had a team with you because you had the family and you kind of all went together.
So this kind of stuff is a lot more complicated because if there's somebody that watches
Yeah.
care for the person, can't necessarily go with you, so it's a little bit different. But the point is trying to make is sometimes, even though it's hard, you can tell yourself to at least come up with an idea and pencil it in, and then don't think yourself that it doesn't work out, but
Yeah.
it's a start.
Yeah, so it is a great point, right? And I think to the people in the audience here who have brought it up, when you're caring for someone, it can be really hard to get away, right? So in a perfect world, to be able to go mountain biking twice a month, that might not be realistic to your caregiving situation, right? So we have to figure out or think about what could be, right? And maybe mountain biking is the long-term goal as you work to maybe get some more supports or some more help, through programs like at Pathlights or friends or whoever that you identify that that's going to be. So maybe that's like a long-term goal for you, but for today, you say, yeah, I kind of don't watch that show anymore that I really enjoyed to watch. Not something I can do at home when dad is there, and I can do that for me, right? So sometimes we have to be very realistic about our situations, right? Because the goal is to not create something like this and then to be so stressed about it, it doesn't happen. Well, that's a great point. And that's it for today, just talking about self-care. Any questions? About self-care, taking care of ourselves? Hard, right? I know that I can sit up here and I can say that it's, what we all have to do, but I know I'm not standing up here though to say, this is really easy, right? So sometimes taking care of ourselves just is on the back burner so easily as it is with caregivers. But it's really, really, really important to identify maybe where we're feeling our stress and be able to kind of figure out a way to manage that.
Make another comment that about mountain biking that may or may not help. Your situation is really hard, and I can't imagine that's really hard. So I'm not trying to simplify anything, but you made me think of something that happened to me where I really like to go hiking and I love the lake and I have my places that I like to go that are kind of far away. I used to go mountain biking and skiing and all that stuff too. But that's what I love, these places and these certain places being by the water, or places I love to hike that have birds and all that stuff. But sometimes lately that just can't happen. I can't get that to happen. It's a little bit too far. I just don't have the time. And it turns out, there are places that are a little bit closer that aren't my favorite that I think I'm not going to like why bother? But as it turns out, even if it's not my favorite place or the place I usually go, so like for example, Lake Catherine.
Mhm.
Go walk at Lake Catherine. It's not the same at all. It's short, it's fast, and it's nothing like going into the woods at the bigger place. But I always find after doing that, I have to make myself doing it. I kind of dread it. So it's the same old thing, whatever. But it does help, something versus nothing.
Yeah.
And once I actually get there, I find out that, oh, it did do something to help to just get out and do that walk. So I have no idea your situation. Again, I'm not trying to simplify, but I just wonder, I know there's a lot of closer places at Swallow Cliffs or whatever, different places that wouldn't be the same as what you're talking. It sounds like distance, but or maybe a trail or whatever, a regular bike trail or something. But something versus nothing is the point. And
Yeah.
even though it's really hard to make it happen, it's something. So just a thought.
Yeah, that's a great
And
thought.
the main point there for me is I really do, I can't even get out of bed to make myself do that. It's like, here we go again. I'm tired of that place and I really don't want to go. But then the things of the day, the fresh air, whatever, and afterwards I think, yep, it was something. Just, cleared it a bit.
Yeah, and that's a great point. So in being specific, right? Maybe it's just about getting outside, right? So yeah, no, that's a great point. So the point that was made was the mountain biking, which one spot with the mountain bike riding. So for the mountain biking, like to go on far trips, but maybe there's some closer options that maybe won't take you so far away from home.
I believe in my head, you probably looked into that already, but it just made me think of that. So I just
And
say
and
something
there might
versus
be
not.
other things too. There might be other things that we can do. Sorry, anything? No, we're good in the chat. Okay. Anybody else? Any questions? Do we think that we'll develop a self-care strategy after today? Something to do? Maybe, did you say maybe? Maybe. It's hard, it's hard. I can sit up here, not in the current role of caregiver. I walked those shoes and I'm currently in it. So I know it's hard if somebody tells you, you just have to take care of yourself. That's sometimes really hard to just even figure out where to start, right? Let's start simple and realistic and be purposeful in what it is that you want to do that brings you joy and that makes you feel better. All right, nothing much, yeah. Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.